So here we go. Where are we going to see the Byzantine Empire? Where do we find this on the globe? Haley? Okay, we're in the right vicinity there. Yeah, we here's Iraq and Iran. What is the capital city of the Byzantine Empire? Constantinople. That is right here in modern day Istanbul, Turkey. Okay, so this is the location of the area we're talking about. So we mentioned how the Roman Empire split into east and west, and this is going to be the eastern side of the Roman Empire. For those of you guys who are doing homework on something else, I'd suggest you put it away. So, what's you say? No, I'm just saying that I have a feeling that some of you are still working on homework that you shouldn't be. Suggest you put it away now and be focusing on history. So we're talking here in this region of the world that is going to be the eastern half of what was once the Roman Empire. And then Islam is going to come in from the east and going to affect and impact what we knew as the Roman Empire there at one time. So we're going to begin here talking about the Byzantine civilization and try to get some key ideas. I'm going to close this blind because I think it'll help us see a little better. There we go. So as we talked about before, this is also known as New Rome because of the fact that we moved the capital city from Old Rome into Constantinople, or New Rome, just off of the Black Sea. And this Roman Empire is going to be developed here by Constantine and going to be established as the main focus of world events throughout this period of history after the fall of Rome. And so you need to make sure that you understand Constantine brought them over there, and it became known as Constantinople, or Constantine's city. So this city was dedicated to Constantine in 330 A.D. And we know quite a bit about it. It was an important commercial center because of the fact that it was right off of the Black Sea, and so many of the items that were being transported from the Far East heading to the Mediterranean had to go through Constantinople. And so people had the opportunity to make a lot of money here. It became a political center, a religious center of the culture, and it becomes the capital of that Eastern Roman Empire. And it became really the queen of the Mediterranean because of the fact that it was so powerful, so influential, that all the other cities along the Mediterranean became jealous of Constantinople. And it greatly benefited by its location as well as its power. And so the people who lived there benefited financially as well. So if you lived in the city of Constantinople after the fall of Rome and now the establishment of the Eastern Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire, you still maintained a lot of the same identity, culture, traditions as what you would have seen in ancient Rome. So there were some variations. However, a lot of people who lived in Constantinople would have described it to be very similar to what you would have seen in the earlier Roman times. Now, the leader of Constantinople was a man by the name of Justinian. He is, obviously, this is after Constantine has passed off the scene. Justinian is perhaps the most significant name that we associate with Constantinople or the Byzantine Empire. But I think we have to look at his wife because she helps him gain his popularity, and it's really, we have to give her a lot of credit for him becoming the leader that he is. And I'll explain why here in just a moment. So his wife's name is Theodora, and they were going through a tumultuous time in their empire, which the people were not exactly thrilled with his leadership. So there was a particular event. at a location called a hippodrome. So spell the word hippo and add the word drome, D-R-O-M-E, after hippo. Hippodrome is the name that they had for this large arena where they would have chariot races. Not exactly like the Colosseum. You guys ever seen Ben-Hur?
Yeah.
So if you've seen Ben-Hur, and they have this almost like a Colosseum. In the center, there's a large wall, and you race around this wall. Think of it kind of like the Indy 500, big racetrack, big circular thing. Okay, so it's kind of that same idea. Typically, the track was made out of dirt, and this is where they would race their chariots, and they would have the finest horses, the finest charioteers, and they would go out and they would compete to see who was the fastest and who was the greatest racer. And there are all kinds of legends and movies that have been made regarding this, and many of them are not accurate, but they give us a picture of what it might have been like. So they're at the Hippodrome. Massive crowds of people coming here to watch these chariot races. And just like we get very much into our sports today, people got into their chariot races back then. So, I'm excited to watch the Wisconsin Badgers play football this weekend. Can't wait. I get excited for that. I was a little disappointed with the way the Packers played last Sunday, losing to Atlanta so badly. But we get all decked out in our football jerseys, or maybe your sport is soccer, or maybe your sport is basketball, and we put on our team's apparel, and we like to sport the way that our teams look. Well, people back then did the same thing. They had colors, and so they would wear those colors. They would have banners and flags representing the colors of the racers or the people that they represented. And a lot of times those coincided with the social class. And so one social class might be a little bit lower on the totem pole in society, but they might have a huge following because they have a really good racer in the race, and they're going to identify with him. And it turns into something a little more political, where they gather together, and as they get there at the Hippodrome for these races, they begin talking about the government. They begin talking about how they can make society better. And it turns into this large debate over how their government should operate, and eventually leads to violence, where there were a couple of groups that turned on one another, and they did not like each other, and so they started to revolt against one another. And this violence erupted at a particular race here at the Hippodrome, where people just started going after one another. And they turned against the government. They turned against Justinian, and they said, we are going to take Justinian out of power. We have a better idea. And so they started plotting and planning an attack on Justinian. Well, Justinian's a little scared. 30,000 men are killed in the Hippodrome as a result of this riot that goes on. It's called the Nika Revolt. Anybody know what Nike stands for?
It's a goddess.
It is? What does it mean? Victory, or to conquer, yeah. And so that Nike, or Nika, was the word for conquer, or to, what was the word you used? Victory, yeah. So this was their revolt to have victory over the government. 30,000 men die in the Hippodrome because of this revolt. And Justinian is considering leaving the country and just abdicating his throne and fleeing away. In fact, he is on the docks getting ready to board a boat that's going to take him across the Mediterranean and get out of town before they come and kill him. And lo and behold, his wife grabs his coat and says, where are you going? What are you doing? Are you a coward that you won't go and stand up for what you believe in? And she drags him back to the palace and says, Justinian, you are not going to walk out on me. You're not going to walk out on your country. You are going to come back and you're going to stand up like a man, and you are going to face your enemies. Yeah. So
She got sass.
there you go. This is why I say, Theodora is responsible for a lot of Justinian's success. Now, before you get too hyped up on Theodora,
Obviously she's dead.
Theodora did not have the most high of reputations. Her moral compass pointed directly south. However, in this particular case, she did stand up for leadership and responsibility, and she dragged her husband back and said, you're going to face your enemies, you're going to keep this country together, and he did. and he put down the revolt, and he got enough men in support of him that they were able to stop the revolution that could have happened here, and he was able to establish order throughout the empire. And so once that revolt settles down, then Justinian made it his goal to restore the greatness of the Roman Empire to Constantinople. And so what he wanted to do is to take what he had in his mind as the Pax Romana, the greatness of the Empire of Rome, and he wanted to apply those things here to Byzantium or New Rome. And so a few things that he did here is he began to recognize many of the old Roman laws, and he instituted them into his authority or into his governing leadership. He took many of the same ideas that leaders had used in Rome, and he put 5,000 laws immediately into place into the Byzantine Empire, and he transferred those over and said, we're now going to follow these same rules and laws. He put together 4 elements to his Justinian Code. Okay, and I think I have these here for you. So we begin here with the Code. All right, that is the 5,000 laws that I just mentioned, and he takes copies over 5,000 of the best Roman laws, and he says, we're not going to follow those. Okay, that's what's considered part of the Code. The Digest is 50 volumes. And when we're talking volumes, we're talking about a large book. 50 volumes of Roman legal documents and legal court cases, decisions that were done in Rome. And he copies those over and says, we're now going to follow these as if they happened here.
Wait, he copied it or had someone else do it?
Well, he had somebody do it,
Okay.
but he said, we're going to follow this. Yeah. No, he did not personally sit down and do all this. But under his leadership, that's what the empire did. So do we understand the importance of court cases?
Yep.
Why do we look back on previous court cases to understand today? Okay, part of it helps dictate our culture. Why else do we look back on old court cases? Okay, sometimes to prevent repeating them.
In case something like that happens again.
Okay, in case something like that happens again. It's a term called precedent. So when a court ruled at one time and said, this is the way that we are going to interpret the law, then future courts need to follow the same guideline. So you guys all have experimented with this at home, I'm sure, where at one time or another you got yourself in trouble for violating a curfew. Let's just make that example. I'm sure it's probably never happened, but let's just say that you violated curfew, and mom and dad said be home by 10. You showed up at 10:30, and you got an earful when you got home. Maybe you got your phone taken away or whatever may have happened, and you learned from your mistake that if that happens again, what would you expect if you show up at 10:30 again next weekend? What do you expect to happen?
You're gonna be locked out of the house.
You're going to experience consequence again, okay, because of the precedent of the previous ruling of mom and dad. So Justinian takes all of these court cases and he says, we're going to use those as a precedent and help us to be able to interpret future situations in our laws here in Byzantium. He also brings in the Institutes. This is a textbook that explains how to use those laws that he borrowed from Rome. This gives an explanation. This is like the Spark Notes for Roman law.
What's Spark Notes?
Hey.
Uh,
have no
yeah. Yeah. Just because we're aware of it does not mean we ought to use it.
What? I don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
Shut up.
Let's call sin sin. Let's make sure we're not lying here.
Are we allowed to use it?
I'm
So-
so, I'm not accusing anybody. I'm just saying if you're going to be very adamant and pronounce things, then make sure that you are being honest and forthright. And I'm not here to judge either. So anyway, the Institutes is a way for them to interpret the laws and explain them a little bit better. And then the Novellae is the new laws that were passed after Byzantium became a empire in itself. So these were specifically geared toward Justinian's reign and toward Constantinople. So these were new. Okay, you can almost see that novelle, new laws there. Yes, ma'am.
Never mind.
Okay, glad to answer your question.
What were they passed after?
They were passed after Byzantium became their own nation. So they were not. None of those were borrowed from Rome. Those were brand new, specifically to Constantinople. Okay, so those are the 4 elements of Justinian Code, and I would make sure that you're familiar with those so that you know what those are all about. So Justinian continues on. Besides borrowing the law code from Rome, he also goes on a massive building project to where he is going to put together a number of new elements that will help people see that Byzantium is powerful, they're wealthy, and it helps them to identify the fact that this is part of the golden age of the Byzantine culture. We mentioned the Pax Romana was the height of the Roman culture. Well, here, Justinian's reign, he oversees the golden age of Byzantine culture. So when he begins this building program, he has the goal of restoring a lot of the grandeur and the wonderful things that Rome had to offer. With all of that comes things like public works, good roads, canals, having easy access to water and supplies that they need. Art was a huge part of it. Any of you art buffs that know what type of art comes out of the Byzantine Empire? Yeah, what's that called? No. The what? Not that I'm aware of, no.
Can you give us
What
the
is this
letters
called
for
here?
Like, is it like a mosaic or something?
Yeah, there it is. Chance got it.
Pablo?
Mosaic art comes out of the Byzantine Empire. And so this is an example of it where you take tiny little pieces of individual substance and you piece it together to make an artistic image. One of my favorite mosaics is in the Jelly Belly factory. You been there?
No, my favorite
You've
was
seen
in
it?
Disney World. In
Okay.
the castle.
Yeah.
I have not been there, so what does it look like?
It has like the whole little story of Cinderella, and it's
Oh, really?
all in a mosaic. It's so cool.
What's the material made out of? Is it glass? Is it porcelain? Is it
I think it's probably just
tiles?
I think it's
You've never been to
Okay.
Disney World?
Well, most
Cool.
mosaics like that are made out of tile.
So-
I think it's tile.
So if you are ever in Burlington, Wisconsin, and which I realize this is probably not on your bucket list, but if you are driving up the interstate from Chicago to Milwaukee, you will pass by Burlington. Just off the interstate, less than 5 minutes, is the Jelly Belly factory. It is absolutely free, and they give away free samples. So that's enough. All right, that's all you need.
Every parent.
Directions, please. I
I-
love free stuff.
Who doesn't? All right, so here you go. You walk in there, you go through the tour, and throughout the tour, they have a number of jelly bean mosaic art that they are made entirely out of jelly beans. So there are a couple of very world famous mosaics in this tour that people have done that would go for crazy money if they were put on the auction block. One of them is done of Elvis, and so somebody put that together. And these are not like little tiny mosaics; they are like huge mosaics, like 6 or 8 feet tall mosaics of their face or some of their full body. My favorite one though is Ronald Reagan, because Ronald Reagan loved Jelly Bellies. He is the one in the 1980s that really helped Jelly Belly become a yeah, okay, we can say world power. But every staff meeting, Ronald Reagan had Jelly Bellies on his desk or on the cabinet meeting desk, and that was like his favorite thing. So I'm a huge Ronald Reagan fan, and so you'll find that out when we get to the Cold War later in the year. Yes, ma'am.
2 things.
All right.
1, how far away is that?
From here, it'd probably take you about 3 hours to get there.
Awesome. Never mind.
Okay.
Field trip.
All right. Yeah, it's not gonna. The tour is not long. It's like a 20-minute tour, so it would definitely not be worth it.
That's a 6-hour trip, so that gives us an hour there
Yeah.
to do something.
Not going to happen. The most prominent church is the Hagia Sophia. And this church was built during the Byzantine Empire, and it still stands today. It is considered one of the greatest architectural marvels that it was able to be built at the time that it was. And so please make sure that you associate that with the architecture of the Byzantine Empire. Yeah, it's a church. Yeah. And part of the motivation for building it so elaborate was so that as people passed through, and many people did pass through Constantinople when they were trading, they would see the amazing church that they had built, and they would walk in there and just be blown away at the power and the money that Constantinople had. And it would be a method of intimidation, but also a method of, or a means of pride for the people of the Byzantine Empire. So yeah, that still stands today. You can go visit it if you want to take a field trip there. I can't take you there. I don't have a passport. Otherwise, I would totally take you.
I'm in a legal
No, I have a passport.
So unfortunately, Justinian did not serve and did not lead without his problems. We already know that he has a confidence issue in his own leadership abilities. Fortunately, he does have a wife who is there as his supporter. But besides that, he neglected to put money into military defense. And with the location where Constantinople is located, they can be attacked from multiple sides, including bodies of water. So they really should have put together some sort of defense system that would have protected them. But unfortunately, he does not. And so, because of that neglect, they're going to be invaded eventually, and it's going to lead to their downfall. They also put so much money into some of these other programs that they financially drain their government. And because they did not plan ahead, and they did not invest that money toward the future, it ended up causing them to go bankrupt where they couldn't afford their military, and eventually they were going to be attacked and destroyed by somebody else.
Basically, they were like, well, let's use all this money to build this grand church so we can show off all our money. And then, oops, we don't have any left.
Yeah, well, it wasn't just the church. That's the most prominent thing that catches your eye. It was all kinds of things, like when they built roads and when they were putting money into art, when they were putting money into kind of showing off. Yes, they just didn't put as much money into military defense as they should have. Yeah. So one of the things that results here is a split of the church. We are going to begin talking through the development of the Catholic Church, and I also want to make sure that we understand the context here, and that we don't take things the wrong direction or take things the wrong way. So when Christ set up the New Testament church, it was just the New Testament church. And as time progressed and the apostles scattered and established churches in different cities, many of them began following rules or coming up with ideas that were not necessarily the way Christ had intended. We get to Rome. Rome establishes a church in that city, which I believe at the beginning had good intentions and was biblical. But as time progressed, they started straying further and further away from the truth. And so it eventually grows into a pretty large church. We're going to talk about how it grows here and then how it splits off. I'm not sure if we're going to get to all of it today, but we'll see what we get to. So the New Testament discusses certain leadership positions in the church, but it does not necessarily use the word patriarch. However, Rome began to use the term patriarch as a leader of the church. And because there were so many churches that were spreading, and because of the influence of men like Constantine, which allowed for Christianity to be legal, Christianity began to spread, and they needed somebody to help guide those churches. And so they established a person who could oversee many churches, and that person was called a patriarch. And so he would go visit those churches, he would check on them, make sure that they are doing things right and that they're following the rules the way they're supposed to. And one of those patriarchs was from Rome, and another one was from Constantinople. And they were two of the most powerful and had the most churches underneath their leadership. So these two guys have a falling out one day. They become very bitter rivals because the guy in Rome thinks that he should be more powerful. The guy in Constantinople thinks that he should be more powerful. So we get to the year 1054. And the guy in Rome takes on the name Pope. All right, the name Pope is father, and there's a little bit more here that I'm not going to have time to go into as far as how the people started calling him Pope, but the guy in Rome takes on the name Pope, and he makes a declaration in 1054. I'm not really concerned that you know that date. However, you should know that the Pope made a declaration in around 1000 AD. And so what he says in this declaration is that I am now the only authority over all the churches in southern Italy. That would be good for you to include and for you to know here about the Declaration of 1054. That he declares himself to be the only authority over the churches in southern Italy. That no other patriarch, no other church leader could tell those churches what to do or how to operate their churches. That he was the one in charge. So all of a sudden now, the guy here in Rome says, I got all this. This is my territory, everybody else stay away. So in some ways, this is a power grab, trying to extend his influence and make himself more powerful. What?
I said, like, why would the other people under the other patriarch let him do that?
He doesn't. He's not going to. So I did not put it up there on the screen. So the guy in Constantinople, he refused the declaration, says, no, you can't do that. That's not within your powers to do. So the guy in Constantinople calls him out and he says, hey, Patriarch of Rome, you don't have the authority to do that. That's not right. He calls him out, and the guy in Rome took offense to that, and so he tells the guy over in Constantinople, guess what? I'm kicking you out of the church. The church uses a term called excommunication for this. And I would write that down because you're going to come back and you're going to see that lots here in the next few weeks. So the guy in Rome says to the guy in Constantinople, you are excommunicated. That means you have no contact, no communication with the church. Forever. And the guy in Constantinople says, you don't have the authority to do that. But I'm going to go back, I'm going to do the same thing to you, and I'm going to excommunicate you out of the church from Rome. So they excommunicate each other. So
No one. That's something my sister
it's like a junior high girlfriend, okay?
Dude, yes.
And
Sixth grade.
we get to we have this happen, and think about it if you're a common church member and you have this person that you're supposed to be looking up to as one of your leaders. We might think of it like a pastor today, and they're having this bitter fight with another pastor from another city, and all of a sudden the pastor from another city said, hey, your pastor is in sin, he's doing wrong, so don't follow him anymore. And this guy says, no, he's telling you lies. That guy's actually having problems. And he's telling people over in Constantinople, you can't follow this guy anymore.
We both have problems. We're both in a different
Yes.
church.
There are no other churches.
Make your own church.
All right. So
House
this is
church. Let's go.
this is part of the beginning of the beginning of the conflict in the church in the Middle Ages. We'll come back and we'll pick up on this again next week. Make sure that you are working on your chapter 12.